So here we are. This used to be the Rangiora Training Institute, now the community college, and it's just great to be here today and the sun's shining, and imagine the number of students who came through this building over the last 40 years and have continued their journey, and the number of successes we had. It all started over here in the back of the bike shed, and there was all of these buildings were very dilapidated, and now they're really home. The students love this place because they feel safe. It's their place, and when they walk in the front door, they belong here, and this is part of the essence of what we've ever wanted. So it all started in Rangiora in the late 70s, early 80s, in a period where it was predicted that unemployment would climb, and what our local response to that might be. Waiting for it to happen, or actually doing something proactive to mitigate against that possibility. And the projections unemployment happened. It rose from 3 or 4% through to 11% in 1987-89, and that progressed through the 90s. So we started initially with the Rangiora Training Institute, and that started with these two programs, beekeeping and horticulture. Then we added hospitality. That was the pilot of the Access program. And at that stage of it, we thought we were going to have to make it a self-sustaining project. We were surprised by the then Labor government that they actually wanted private enterprise to compete against the state institutions to provide training at lower levels, entry-level training. So we tendered for those programs, and we won contracts for both Rangiora and Christchurch, and that's where the Academy started as a private enterprise proposition, and over the next 10 years became a nationwide organisation where we had at any one time 4,000 students enrolled on programs varying from hospitality to bricklaying to home care to commercial skills. The training was aimed at making sure that they had the transferable skills to be attractive to an employer, and that was making the environment that we offered as work-like as possible so that they'd advance their ability to fit into a job and be productive from year one in the workplace that they chose to work in. In those very early years, there was the university and the Polytech who ran apprenticeship programs, and because they required an employer, those programs were declining by about 30% a year, but there was no other training programs at all. So we were real innovators in those days to provide training for all ages. So in the Access program, we had anyone from 50 or 60 down to school leavers. But because employers were reluctant at that stage of it to take on new people, we were providing that work experience on site here. We called it practical training for practical people. So it was very, very work focused.
And what we discovered, it was quite straightforward to take a student on, and they could be 15 or they could be 55, and give them an opportunity, give them some care, give them some hope. There's work experience built into that, and after 12 or 16 weeks, we could get them into employment as well, because the employer had some trust that they had a skill, they had a commitment, they had some work-based habits. Through that period of time, the late 80s into the 90s, there were other providers in Christchurch doing a similar thing, and we were always seen as elite, and we got the best students. That wasn't true at all. What was different is we treated our students better. We gave them good facilities, qualified staff, and just good programs. I think that was the main difference. And in those high times of unemployment, we're getting 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10 people into employment every time. So it was pretty effective. But by 1996, under Jim Bolger's coalition government with New Zealand First, at that stage, 96 or 97, that program Access was abandoned and turned into two programs. One was called Training Opportunities for people over 18, and they were beneficiaries from work income, and then Youth Training, which is under 18s. And that was the start of the separation. And as we followed the money through the years, we've ended up with youth only.
I had this wish that we got closer back to our community. It started off in Rangiora as a charitable organisation, and I was really keen to get back to that really. So we decided that we would split the Academy New Zealand up. So we then moved out to Rangiora as our headquarters here, and turned the name into community college, and then over the subsequent next 2 years changed the constitution to a charitable constitution. Doug and I are essentially the directors or trustees, so we have a formal relationship between ourselves and Kate. It's been a difficult journey, and she's had to traverse those changes as the government became much more prescriptive in what they required of us, to the stage that a lot of the things that Kate and ourselves held dear to make them good citizens, in other words, those transferable skills, communication, understanding the community that they lived in, all of those community type skills taught through adventure-based learning and other things, were crowded out by the need to race for credits. So sadly, the programs where each individual's needs were being met, that was their cry for help when they entered the organisation, we weren't able to do that in this highly prescriptive and compliance-driven approach that the government took. So sadly, in the end of 2021, we chose to suspend those programs and focus very much on youth service. It was really sad time for us because we lost people who had been with us for up to 20 years and had sacrificed a lot to continue working with us. But nevertheless, we got to the point where we just didn't have the bandwidth to do both jobs well. So now we've very much focused on youth service as our key delivery, and then looked around and said, right, how do we look as we approached our 40 years? How do we look at the organisation anew?
So we went to the community and we were like, look, we've looked after these young people for the last, 40 years. What is it that, what's the community going to do for these young people? And the message very strongly came back, well, you're going to continue to do what you do in some way, because, that's what needs to happen. So then it was about, how do we go about that? So then we looked at, okay, what is it that these young people need? Take away all the credit chasing and the qualifications and those sorts of things. Strip it back to basics, and they need, it was back to the 5 ways of wellbeing. They needed somewhere to feel whether they could belong, somewhere that they could connect with other people, somewhere they could learn things, somewhere they could, be give of themselves. And our Grow program grew out of that, which is all about goals, resilience, opportunity and wellbeing. Every program is full with a wait list well before it's due to start, because that need in the community was still there. But we want to be more than just our Grow program, which we're moving in down the sustainability line. We want to move into the food and fibre sector, and we've established a native tree nursery with the view that we will grow our own trees to establish our own biodiversity corridor. But within that opens up a space for young people to come and learn those skills, transferable skills in that space as well.
So now we've joined up with the council, the school, with Ngāi Tahu and other interested parties to really go on this journey and turn what was the school farm into a living laboratory around sustainability. So it has reinvigorated ourselves, I think, in terms of our vision for the next 40 years. I think really it comes back to, the people that have been with us on this journey. We've had some wonderful people who have been part of this, and, all I can do is pay tribute to them, really. They say that a good manager employs people smarter than themselves. Well, that's been easy for me. All of the people here are smarter than I am. So it's just been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and I'm just so looking forward to how the team take up the cudgels for the next 40 years.
I've worked with Tony for 36 years, which seems pretty mad. But I think one big factor is it's a very involving role when you're dealing with young learners and with colleagues and with other outside agencies. There's a lot to do, and it's very challenging. And it I think all people in Comcol, it uses up a lot of themselves. They've got to invest emotionally as well as with time. So there are also good rewards with that. You see, you try and do something and it works, or you make an appointment with a staff member and they're successful, or things go well, and you're making a difference to the young person, their family and their community. It's very important and it's very rewarding. So that's been really cool.
It's always been incredibly supportive to be able to do the right things, and also to have the freedom to do what was going to work for each individual. And I think as you're sort of moving through things, that's what you continue to strive to have in place, that there's freedom for people to do what they believe is the right thing for each person. And we've also always never been about the numbers. Any conversations that you've had around how things are going and it's never been about the numbers, it's about what's the benefit for that individual. And that's huge for me.
In each region where the managers, and if you go out for morning tea with them, along the street, there'll be students or past students wanting to say hello and tell them how valuable the college was or academy was. And we're probably talking in excess of 100,000 who have directly benefited from a program. In a lot of occasions, that person was the first family member to ever have a qualification, even if it was at a lower level. So it transformed that family, not just that student, but the family, to encourage them to have a path that was a more positive path than they were on previously. So, we're enormously proud of the influence that we've had. And also a lot of work that Doug and I have done is advocacy at a political level too, so that anything we've learned can hopefully persuade policymakers in favour of making sure that these kids are looked after. Not always successful. The last 10 years it's been much more difficult. We used to have politicians who mirrored in their policy work a lot of the work that we were doing, which we're really encouraged by. But sadly that hasn't been the case in recent years, but we never give up. So we will continue to do that work.
So it's pretty cool, the environment that we've got to work in, and the legacy that has been left by Doug and Tony is certainly left big shoes to fill. But really excited about the next 40 years and working with future generations and creating better lives for our community.